Today, I wanted to discuss Train to Busan Peninsula with you. Now, I love all things zombie related, from Fear the Walking Dead, Left 4 Dead 2, 28 Days Later, etc. Doesn't matter what genre, I'm into it. And Train to Busan was a masterpiece in its own right. It felt original, had characters that the audience could become attached to, and most importantly, a linear story. Peninsula failed to carry over any resemblance from Train to Busan even after maintaining the same director. The film still has a place in the zombie universe, and I honestly want to point out the issues that stood out to me to hopefully receive something better in the future, as I know this director aims to expand on his universe. Now, I don't want to nitpick everything, but focus in on several key things that stood out to me. First was language. Now, I don't speak Korean, and I'm sure if I mention any character names throughout, they will be incorrect. But I could not understand why they felt it necessary to have the main character start speaking English. Of course, there are some scenes where it makes sense, such as speaking to an American character, but aside from that, it just felt unnecessary. Part of this film's allure was the fact that it was a Korean film. Just be proud of that and hold on to it. Why would we have characters continue to speak to each other in a subpar second language instead of their first language? It didn't make any sense. The second issue that stood out to me was atmosphere. The first city we encounter looked like a film adaptation of Sleeping Dogs, from the colorful surroundings to the small-minded thugs that were out and about. Honestly, it's as if they played a run-through of the game and figured they could just slip into the Western mindset much easier with it. When we finally cross over into the abandoned city, just about everything in the distance looked CGI'd. Now, I'm sure there was some level of CGI in the first film for the environment, but it just felt natural in Train to Busan and not so imposed on the entirety of the film. Thirdly, characters. The main character's involvement with the gang felt random. There was no reason for them to know each other, and if there was, it wasn't properly fleshed out. Simply that this gang had it out for the main character without addressing what their connection was. Same thing going for the stepbrother and the two Korean party members, who all supposedly were known to the gang, but no backstory of how that came to be. It did make sense for the gang to send in random strangers, like why kill your men when you can sacrifice for other people, but it would be completely useless to send in one trained ex-military soldier and 3 civilians, which is what this group was. The stepbrother did not, to my knowledge, have any combat experience. The Korean woman was a taxi driver, and the fourth character appeared to be a mechanic. By the way, I have to say Korean taxi driver and mechanic because they didn't even bother giving these few characters names. Clearly, they were meant to be zombie bait. Of course, like the first film, where as the film progressed, all of the extra characters began to die off, slowly but surely, but they still had personality between themselves. They still had names, and this was completely cut out in the film. We had nothing but obvious target dummies. Fourth point, suspense. There was no real buildup of suspense throughout the movie at all. In my opinion, Train to Busan created a name for itself by putting real people with real emotions in situations that they were not prepared to handle. Peninsula could have further built on that easily by bringing real people who were ill prepared for what they were about to encounter to a city where one wrong step leads you to your death. Instead, they toss all of that out the window for a mix between Fast and the Furious and Rambo meets the zombie apocalypse. The exaggerated amount of guns in this film further robbed from the suspense, as they had an easy counter to just about every single situation. And the fifth major issue that stood out to me was the story, or lack thereof. I could not connect with any of the characters. If they wiped them all out midway, it wouldn't have made a difference. There were attempts at making this a redemption film. However, their attempts at it fell heavily. Every emotional scene lasted way too long and made no difference. Jung Seok's stepbrother dying didn't faze us. Old Man Kim, who is a cheap knockoff of Bill from Left 4 Dead 2, by the way, didn't faze us either. There was no express love between the characters or sense for me to care that they died, and even the small attempts at it seemed like it was emotion placed into the film, but it just didn't feel natural. I can skip over the entirety of Unit 631 and Sergeant Huang. They were as cliche as zombies biting people as a means of conversion. Talking about cliches, who could have guessed that the gang was lying all along and would kill whoever managed to return with the $20 million? It was obvious that this is what they would be doing. And what can I say about the grand finale, which was a last attempt at making this a redemption film, like the ending of Train to Busan, attempting to half-ass wrap up the movie with Jung Seok coming into the rescue, placing his life at risk by trying to save Min Jung. Now I get it, alright? I get it. He felt bad during the film about abandoning Min Jung and her daughters, but it didn't come close to the redemption story presented by Seok Woo in Train to Busan, as it perfectly weaved through the movie. And finally, I truly want to see this director hit the brakes and make something captivating again. This is, of course, just my own personal view, and the director himself was quoted saying Peninsula was inspired by films like George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, Mad Max Fury Road, and Cormac McCarthy's The Road. But the biggest counter I have to that is we're tired of seeing films like this. As of right now, this film has only made $35.9 million. It cost them $16 million to film. They just barely doubled their money, and good for them. That sounds pretty great. However, Train to Busan made $98.5 million and cost $8.5 million to produce. They made $90 million. The audience is clearly reflecting a similar opinion, and after being mesmerized by Train to Busan and how great it was, I know Sang Ho Yoon can deliver better. Now, if you made it this far, I really appreciate it, and I would like to know your thoughts on these points that stood out to me. As well, don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for listening.